Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Clyde Sherrod here from Africa Media Australia. On tonight's edition of African Knowledge Show, we will be talking about community engagement. Community engagement is very important because, as a minority group in Australia, it's important for us as a community to engage with various stakeholders in order for us to get the best we can get to advance our communities. We also need to engage amongst ourselves because it is important to ensure that those who are most skilled and most gifted amongst ourselves can represent us and be able to help steer the community to the direction that is needed in order to develop everything we have in the community. So community engagement is the topic tonight, and I'll be discussing this with my guest tonight. His name is Ben Shuli. Kennedy, how are you going tonight?
I'm well, Clyde. How are you tonight?
Good. Thanks for coming to African Knowledge. Let me ask you just to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit more about yourself so everybody knows who you are and what you do.
My name is Ben Shuli. I currently reside in Queensland and Brisbane. I currently work as a policy officer with the Queensland Health. I'm originally from the Democratic Republic of Congo, where I was born. I've lived a few different countries, including Malawi, before I arrived in Australia. So I've done a bit of my education here as well. So I've done a bit of high school and my university here, pretty much more focusing in the health sector. And that's how I ended up finding myself working in the public health and policy area with the Queensland Health. Being pretty much more involved as well with community, different community organizations to make sure that we provide that support to our most vulnerable community members who are in need, and ensuring that we are liaising between community, government, and other stakeholders as well to make sure that our voice is heard, and at the same very time, we communicate what are the needs of our community, and where necessary, we advocate as well.
Absolutely. So you are in Queensland, and this is actually one thing that is very important. We would like to be able to hear voices from all corners of Australia, from African Australian communities, even though we are based in Melbourne, in Victoria, but African Media Australia has always had that vision to trying to represent or to give a voice to various African Australian communities across the country. So tonight it's Queensland and Brisbane in particular. So how long have you been living in Brisbane for, Kennedy?
Nearing 10 years now, actually. I've been living in Brisbane. So
Okay.
just pretty much traveling, if it can be for Melbourne or Sydney, it's been just simply traveling, but I've been basing myself here in Queensland.
And tell us about life in Brisbane. For those who may not necessarily live in Queensland, we know that a lot of people leave Victoria and go to Queensland for the sunshine. Tell us more about that.
Well, mentioning of Sunshine Coast, today was a bit sunny, so but it's been chilly over the night. When comparing to Melbourne or Victoria, well, the major difference I can tell probably at the moment is the easing of restrictions for COVID-19. Given that at the moment we are not in lockdowns, thank God, but of course we still have those restrictions in place to make sure that we keep everyone safe, wearing face masks and other social distancing protocols. So we're still keeping those in place. But otherwise, the community here is growing as well. We have a very large African community, and people are based in different suburbs around Queensland. And it's pretty much quite a very welcoming state, I can say. It's becoming more diverse, multicultural, and I continue to hope that it continues to grow in the same pace.
Yeah, that is very good. There are a lot of Africans in Brisbane. Do you have any number and any idea on the number of Africans in Queensland in general and Brisbane in particular?
Well, in Queensland in particular, I could say generally we are reaching more than 70,000 at the moment. So those are the people of African descent. When we say African descent, it's pretty much more regardless of the country of origin, and regardless whether you were born here or not, but you are really descending from the African origins. So we have more than 70,000 at the moment. And these are the when we look at this population, we do see potential in a lot of people currently in Queensland, especially for the African community.
Okay. Um, Now let's talk a bit about what you do. You are a senior policy officer with Queensland Department of Health.
Correct.
Tell us about a little bit about your work.
Well, it wouldn't not so much in depth, but really my work is more around policy, ensuring that there is engagement with our stakeholders, doing a very diverse work to make sure that we are putting interventions that are really helpful and useful for Queenslanders, those that will
Mhm.
be more effective to ensure that the services that are being delivered to Queenslanders are really working to the best of people who lives in Queensland. So, but with during the COVID period at the moment, now we are more looking to make sure that it's not only really a specific group of people that are benefiting from whatever intervention that the government is putting forward, but also people of different groups. For example, people from culturally and linguistically diverse background, of whom the Africans also sit under that umbrella. So the most important of the money is to really ensure that there is that engagement. We put some time forward to hear from people, ensuring that whenever we're making a decision or whenever the government itself is making a decision, there is more. There is really a good advice that is effective to reach the needs of that community. So some of these have been part of my work, and of course, I'm a more community person. I tend to contribute to that community engagement advice on how to engage people from culturally and linguistically diverse background, not only limiting to that as well, but the general Queensland population, because I've attended my degree here and I have a very good knowledge of how this function in Queensland as well.
That's good. And obviously, besides your work, you, as you said, you are quite involved in the community. Give us a bit of a picture of what you've been doing in terms of your community engagement. I mean, involvement really with the broader African Australian community.
Mm. Well, my work in the African community is quite really it's quite large in if I can just say in general. So I've been involved with different African organizations at the moment. Uh, at the moment, I'm with the African Community Council, Queensland African Community Council. I've been chairing a research committee of which I've been pretty much more trying to understand what are the current gaps existing in service delivery and what are the barriers that are currently preventing our people to access these services or whatever available support. And I've been involved myself as well with the federation itself of African Community Councils across Australia, serving in the interim as a deputy secretary general nationwide. And it's been pretty much more the same work of ensuring that we put our people interests at heart. Not only really in a sense that we favor, but rather we really kind of provide some advocacy to bring that to the attention of those decision makers, to let them know that actually here there is this community that is made up of more than 70,000 people if we are to talk in Queensland. And
Mhm.
I don't think there is a very good idea to why this specific community should be forgotten and we just move and have it not noticed. So that has been part of my work. And of course, I'm part of the African Professionals of Australia as well, which does more of professional development, a lot of ensuring that there is a very good diversity in work space and workforce, including with the inclusion of African people. So it's pretty much more in that sector that we've been doing more advocating for the community, regardless of the circumstances and barriers, ensuring that we consider at heart that there is a need of someone speaking out about this current community. And I think the government is quite welcoming, very welcoming as well, to really hear from the people. And it's always just a need of having the right people who are really keen and willing to speak up, because sometimes you may have some opportunities available, but If you don't really have people who will be courageous enough to speak out
Mhm.
about the needs of the community, then it's a problem.
Mm.
So these are pretty much of the activities that I've been doing so far in the community to ensure that there is more support provided to our communities.
So I suppose you both your work as a professional as well as your community engagement has exposed you to that sort of need that there is to for the community and the government, for example, to be able to engage meaningfully. And obviously, for communities such as Africans in Australia, there are a lot of needs. There are people, there are different needs in the community. There are those who are come to Australia as professionals and have needs that are different from those who come from sort of a forced migration background. Do you feel like there is sufficient and meaningful engagement between these two entities?
Well, I would say yes, in the given time, but of course, there is still a long way. We wouldn't say that it's already enough, but some steps have been already being taken to ensure that there is that engagement. When we look a few years ago, I tend to say when we look at yesterday, we see that actually there are a lot of gaps that were still there, that a lot of issues that were still remaining unaddressed. In the given time, I do see, although really COVID-19 has pretty much provided a lot of challenges, and it's been really more very tough times for many people. But at the same very time, I tend to say that it has presented a great opportunity to expose those gaps that have been there, but have just remained unaddressed by governments, even by community leaders themselves, because there are those areas that we do find that people are in need of this type of service. But community leader would just say, "Well, I don't think we have enough to attend to this particular issue, and therefore we'll just shut up and just do nothing." And then governments have been just in the same very space as well. Well, we think it's already given that we can't hear anyone saying anything. But with the current situation of COVID-19, we've seen that there is a lot of engagement happening. And of course, that is happening with the advocacy from leaders, community leaders, and of course, government itself becoming quite open to support people from different walks of life, regardless of your background, regardless of your race. So these have been different steps that have been taken by governments. Of course, the same very thing also present challenges as well on how do we deal with this community, how do we engage this community, what are the needs of this community. So you would find that the government or the community is really willing to have that discussion, to have that engagement happening. But again, you find that those gaps are still there. And I think my role as a community leader, as a person in the community with a lived experience, with my own journey, as well as a person from culturally and linguistically diverse background, it's been that my task as well to provide pretty much the advice on both sides. And when we say government wise, we pretty much tend to have that moment where we provide some advice and let them know that actually this gap is really essential for us to address. For example, we've had different issues around our languages for people from Cal background, especially the African community, because we do have, despite having that more than 70,000 people, is still considered a minority group. So, and if it is a minority group, not really so many really will always find a need to prioritize that group. But at the end of the day, when you find that there are people from that background, there are people from Cal background with lived experience, they are able, of which I do quite often, to provide really tailored advice to make sure that need is addressed properly. And that's how the government even itself has been really seeing that need to ensure that there is translated materials for people from culturally and linguistically diverse background, to make sure
Mhm.
that their needs are met, because this wasn't really a fashionable thing to do back in the days. Of course, there used to be translations in different departments, in different governments bodies, that we would
Mhm.
agree. However, it hasn't been to this level of ensuring that the service is provided on timely basis.
Okay, for those, let me just remind those watching that you're watching African Knowledge here at Africa Media Australia. We're talking today about community engagement tips and tools with Ben Shuli, who is a senior policy officer at Queensland Health Department. If you have questions, if you have comments, please, we encourage you to write them down, and so that we can eventually get Kennedy to address some of that. In the meantime, please, if you don't mind, share this feed, the link to on your Facebook wall, so that other people can also watch. And if you're watching and you have something that you think you can share with the community, do not hesitate to contact us here at Africa Media Australia. The platform is open. Now, Kennedy, when I look at community engagement, because I've been obviously myself in my leadership role in the community, I've been engaged in this sort of activity for quite some time. I see some of the issues that tend to, I suppose, affect many communities, but the actual engagement from the community side, where you would expect people to be quite well organized, structured, and trying to unite strength so that they can speak with one voice and be able to, reach out to the decision makers and policy makers who have the power to make the decisions and do things that will change life of community members. But that sort of thing is not always happening. There's a lot of disconnected voices all over the place. Everybody's trying to, make themselves noticed, and in that sort of cacophony, a lot of things are lost. Is that also happening in Queensland, or it is a bit more organized down that way?
Yeah, well, I think that has been one of the things that I myself have been really so critic about. I really tend to take that risk to really criticize that kind of approach when it comes to putting personal interest in everything when we are supposed to support the community. And I think human beings are human beings, regardless of the location. There will always be those individuals. But again, there is always a need to have people who challenge that type of attitude, have right people who are really more than willing to reproach, to really kind of put some suggestions forward. This is the way things should be run, and this is how things should be done, and this is how we can support this community. Because at the end of the day, really, when that person puts their own person interests, well, it will benefit for a little while, a very short period of time, but later on they will regret, because there is a need of having that group of people organized first for you to even benefit for a longer term. Why should you really appreciate to only have something for shorter term when you could have had it for a longer term? Looking Queensland wide, at the moment, I would say when I look at different, because I've been pretty much in this community engagement thing, I've been involved with different states as well to just check on how they're progressing. Of course, we appreciate the work that our all states are doing, and we really give some kudos on that. But when we look at Queensland at the moment, it's soaring. Queensland is pretty much really going higher, doing better in terms of the African community. There is a lot of more unity happening more than before. But of course, that can be the case today, and then tomorrow you may find that it has broken, but of which I'm not really wishing. But it's always really, and that's why I say at the very beginning that it's always great to have people who are always more than willing to take a risk and challenge some type of attitude of personal interests. Because, well, it is true you will benefit from whatever you are doing because you're putting some effort into it. However, it doesn't mean that your name should be now the only name that should be existing. Now the rest of the people are no longer really are becoming only servants. It doesn't work that way. In the community, we ought, when we call it community, it means it's everyone's effort. And therefore, when we are going up, we have to make sure that we are all going together. But if you go alone now as a person who is leading, and then you are now looking into how much are you making out of it, because of course not many really do make anything out of it because it's more voluntary work. But of course there are those when someone has already put their name forward that they want to benefit only, and then that becomes the case, and that doesn't last because people you are really working with those who you are now putting just aside for them to continue kind of acting as they're serving you, there will be the same very people who will now rise and oppose you in many occasions where you could have worked together to challenge the system, because of course everyone do admit and agree, regardless of race, even people who are not really African descent, we still all agree that there is still issue with the current system. Uh, we still need to address a lot of issues around culturally appropriateness. We still need to ensure that we advocate for diversity. Now, if you have that, and then you have the community itself still battling with tribalism, still battling with,
Division.
with so trying to, like, the ego, a person is still trying to be the only person who will be known, who will be mentioned, who will be here and there, and then you leave that community behind and you make it as your own run organization, as if you own that community or that organization. That becomes a problem. And I think in Queensland we've been shaping that. We've been making sure that when there is an opportunity, we really include people from different groups. From regardless of their backgrounds, and we also make every opportunity available to everyone. So I don't know
And
about tomorrow, but in
yeah,
the meantime, things are pretty much taking shape.
and I think one thing that has been quite outstanding in Queensland is your community, Queensland African Community Council, has been doing quite well. It's a sort of a big body that has united African communities together, and that has been happening for quite some time. Tell us a little bit about that, because you have been a member, and I think you even playing some leadership role in that organization. Tell us a little bit more about that.
In the engagement wide, you mean?
No, just the actual Queensland Community
Mhm.
Council of, African Community Council, which has been doing well as an
Yep.
organization,
Mhm.
compared to what I see in other states. For example, in Victoria, we don't quite have a peak body as such, but the Queensland African Community Council has been a peak body for the Queensland African communities, and it has been doing quite well. What has been the secret of that?
Mm. Well, the major secret really is always really having committed people. Have people who are willing to risk everything for the sake of the community.
Mm.
Have people who are more than willing to put their name forward, their hand up, that we really just need to have something in forward. Have people who are really hungry to have something being forward. Because there are people who may have those opportunities presented, but they may not be willing to take the risk. Because when I look at Victoria or other states, even Queensland, there are those opportunities there, because the opportunity in question really is having that community in place already. We have Africans in different states. We have Africans here in Queensland. But the main secret is not only having that community, the Africans in that particular state. The secret is really having people who are bold enough, willing to serve, who have had enough of having a divided community. Of course, as many brands it, when it comes to Africans, many tend to use that term that the community is divided. But
Mm.
ourselves, we tend to fail to realize what really does that mean when people say that we are divided, because other community are, we are just all human beings regardless of our races. We do have differences in opinion, we do have differences in our likes and dislikes, so those can still can still influence that division or change. But when it comes to the African community, there is always need of really accepting that those critics will always be there, and there is a need of standing up. And the first thing is to really get rid of that ego. Like, that selfish ambition, because I can be determined to do something in our community, and then the person who will be next to pull my leg and just really bring me down will be just another community member.
But I can
You see,
argue.
so
I can
mm,
let me. Sorry to interrupt. I can argue that. I mean, the African communities are almost the same, even though obviously there may be differences in some areas. But if you
mm,
look at community, African communities in Australia, whether it's in Victoria, New South Wales, Brisbane, kind of the composition is kind of the same, but and we sort of have the same issues, the same challenges. But
Mm,
what has allowed or what has enabled the Queenslanders to do better in that sort of peak body representation? What is missing, and how? And I think I can even see a question from William Abur, who was watching, and he was asking, "Is there anything that you can suggest that can assist us in Victoria as African community to, sort of get that big body organization success that you guys have enjoyed in Queensland?"
mm. Yeah, I think the most important thing, first of all, really is to have the right people in place. So, but at the same time, acknowledge the fact that there will be challenges,
Mm,
because I think what I've been making a lot of bodies to fall is that people just come with a higher expectation that from day one will start flourishing. And that is not
mm,
really true. There is always a need to accept that there will be challenges. Challenges can come from the fact that not all community members will be willing to participate so much as you want.
mhm,
There will not be so much support even from other communities or different other stakeholders. They will still disagree with you to have that body standing, because of course if you are an organization, you can't just always forever say that you're going to do on a voluntary basis. People will need to put their time in something that's going to pay them. So there is that need of making sure that you set that strategic approach, ensuring that there is that great communication between people who are already existing in the body. For example, let people know that we already have this organization, of course. What is the intention of this organization? Is the organization there only as a vehicle for me as a president or as a leader to get me somewhere? Communicate that clearly. So the intention, for example, should be, we need to form this body. We are forming it, and we need to make sure that we advocate for our people. The potential opportunities can include really getting to some point where we can own at least our own something that is our community owned. For example, can be some sort of a certain service provision, like it can be let's say maybe a bus, it can be maybe a community center, it can be something like that. So it's always great to think real critically. Don't just be in that body and just let it just like that for the sake of just meeting. We need to
mm,
have plans. Why do we have to create that body? So, and that's one of the things that we've done, because the body has been existing there for quite some time, but at a certain stage it wasn't really so loud, so really sorry, it wasn't soaring as it is now. So, and the secret behind that has been pretty much really putting some other strategic documents forward. Don't just be existing as a body, but you can have any document to show that you are people who are committed to do the work. So we did put a few documents forward, which included some code of conduct. Let's say, for instance, some of the visions of the organization. Each and every organization, I do know, does have a vision, but that vision need to be realistic. So,
mhm.
for example, the vision for us would be, let's say, to ensure that the voice of African community is heard in Queensland. But it's heard where? To who? So that's a question, because you
Okay.
shouldn't just say that it is heard. Well, it can be heard from to another African member, but set up who are the targeted stakeholders, who do you want to reach, so that that body can be heard. And
All
that's
right.
how we did put in place that government, this organization that we know do play a role in the community. We need to engage this organization and sit down together and discuss the challenges of our community and put some suggestions forward on how to work from
And
now.
how has the Queensland government been supporting you guys? Have they been supportive in terms of providing the resources and working closely with you to address some of the issues that the community faces?
Well, the government have been supportive in one way or the other, and of course, there is still always that gap that still need to be filled. As I've said, that problems never ends, so there is always that need to identify issues and then address them. So, For example, at the moment, the government have been quite supportive to initiate some engagement strategies with communities, and if I can say the African community in specific. So there are different forums that the government, Queensland government itself has set up, especially the Department of Health, given that the current pandemic is more leaning toward the health sector. So the Queensland Health has pretty much set up a certain forum where leaders from CALD background do get that platform to voice their issues and to suggest what would be the better strategies to attend and to address those issues. Secondly, there have been a lot of advocacy, a lot of youth work, challenges faced by African community, younger people, and we've seen a bit of support from some support from the government and from different stakeholders as well, which are community-led organizations. We've also been seeing, because myself have been doing a little bit of as part of the research committee that I've been chairing, we've been doing a bit of research, and that was a funded project as well to ensure not so much of huge money, but it's more really showing that support to the community that we really need to see this happening. So myself, I've been chairing that and leading it as a project. So I've led that project of research and trying to understand the barriers preventing African community members from accessing mental health services, mental health and alcohol and other drugs. So we identified different, so the aim of that particular research project has been to really get to talk to people. So we used two different methods. We used the qualitative and quantitative, and you can't do that without resources, findings, for example. And these
but sorry to interrupt. I know that it's important to research some of the issues that affect the community, but the question is sometimes the community actually does do quite a bit of work. Then they go to the government to try and get the resources that are needed to implement whatever project or whatever plan that they may have, and they're not always successful. I wanted to know whether there is significant level of support from the Queensland government that may potentially explain why the Queensland community, the Queensland African Community Council, has been more successful than others. Because if there is significant support, does help the community to be strengthened and stuff. So has there been sufficient support in your view or from your experience that you have seen from the government in terms of money, resources, and other programs designed or targeted for the African Australian communities? Have you seen more programs than elsewhere? Because you said you also researched other groups as well beyond Queensland. Have you seen more support from the Queensland government or not?
Definitely. Well, there have been support from in different areas. Well, like I said, there is always still a gap to ensure that that support increases so that we can reach this vast population. But the growth of this current body has been also based on that support provided by the government. So there are programs in place that are currently being run by the African Community Council, I can assure you though, that have been supported by the Queensland government as well.
And is the Community Council regularly funded or not? I mean, does the government provide ongoing funding for the organization or not?
I wouldn't say that there is an ongoing funding, but it normally depends on the issue that is raised to the government. And if that issue seems to be really in favor on what they think would be beneficial to the community, then that matter or that project tend to be funded. And then that's why I give the example of the mental health project. So it's run through the African community actually, and that was funded as well. So which means what I've been doing whenever I was collecting data, we've been giving incentives to those who have been attending, supporting in that interview to make sure that we get the information. Those who have been supporting as research assistants have been getting a little bit of incentives as well as part of the research project I've been leading. So that is funding from the government itself.
All right, let's talk about COVID, because you mentioned that a few times, and that's actually part of the work you're doing in the health department. Obviously, COVID has been an issue for all communities around Australia and beyond. How is the Queensland government specifically doing to help the African Australian communities in relation to COVID? Most of the time, what we tend to see is they get some material translated, perhaps
Mm,
a little bit of engagement where they would invite community leaders for some sort of online chat, but there's not much really that tends to come from the government that specifically looks at the best ways to assist African Australian communities in relation to the COVID. What has your experience been in Queensland, both from your work as well as from the community perspective?
mm. Well, first of all, I would say that it's always great to acknowledge the barriers, the areas that we still have gaps, and those where we've been facing a lot of challenges. Uh, when I look at the Queensland government, both and the community, there have been a lot of initiatives from Queensland government that have been to address different gaps in the community, especially, well, regardless of whether be it African community or other communities. And I
Hmm.
think it's been sitting under that umbrella where what we call people from culturally and linguistically diverse background called. So at the moment, Queensland Health itself or the government in general do have a few some initiatives that are put in place to ensure that people from culturally and linguistically diverse background are getting uh, the message, are getting the support they need to ensure that the information is disseminated on time, and that has
Hmm.
been one of the target. Most of our community members have been really struggling to get the message on time, and others have been struggling to get their message. They could get it on time, but that is the English because some of us do speak English as our second language, third, fourth, or fifth, and
Hmm.
even more. So and you found that people are not really getting the message on time. So in Queensland government, what it's been doing have been pretty much more as well to ensure that there is that gap being built, being filled, and that has been in a sense of translating the message. And another actually approach that the Queensland government have noted that they've been putting in place have been setting up some forums that are available to people from culturally diverse background. And there is, for example, there is an opportunity where when there is a lockdown or when there are some restrictions, the chief health officer herself and different departmental officers, of which sometimes tend to include myself, would have that Zoom meeting, a forum, set specifically for people from culturally and linguistically diverse background to address any issue that people of that group might be facing, to
Okay.
address if there is any question people from CAL background do have. And most of our African leaders tend to attend that meeting as well. They're always invited. And there is also an opportunity, a specific community also can request Queensland government to have a meeting with them to address any misconception, to address any question or concern to that specific community. That opportunity as well is there. So,
So
which
have you
means
seen
it's
have you seen much from African community leaders engaging with the government in relation to COVID to make sure
yeah,
that there is sufficient level of attention and resources provided to help people who may be particularly vulnerable to the whole crisis. Has that been happening?
yeah. Well, I would give even a very specific example to my own self within the Queensland African Community Council. So, since when the pandemic started in 2020, I mean, like early 2020, so we did set up a COVID-19 community response for African community. So that was one strategy we did put in place, and I was chairing it myself. So what I've been doing has been to invite different community leaders, ethnic community leaders as well of African background, community members, regardless of of people's knowledge or whatever. Just invite everyone who is able to attend, and make sure that when we address the issues, it's not just coming from our own head or based only on how I feel. So what we've been doing has been to hear from other people from African background, listen to what they think is what have they experienced during the pandemic, and then brainstorm together. What do we think would be the most viable strategies that can help to ensure that those barriers are addressed, or those issues of experienced issues are addressed. So, and then what we've done, I did put a document together actually. So maybe I can just show you. There is one. Um, so we call it Queensland African Community Council COVID-19 Community Response Plan. So this is a 18 pages document. So I was chairing that and I was leading this particular group. So after brainstorming all of these things, we didn't just say that let it as it is. We understand it's a problem and leave it. Nor we did document that. And then what we did was to consult with different ministers, consult with different government officials to raise these concerns of the community. Let them know these are the issues that we are currently experiencing. And these are the strategies we think going to help to solve these problems. Because you don't want to show up there and only address only the issues and then you can recommend what should be done.
Yeah,
and that has been the approach we've been putting in place. Sorry, we've met with different stakeholders. Yeah.
No, go ahead. Finish what you were saying.
Yeah.
You met with different stakeholders.
We've met with different stakeholders, including the different ministers as well. We've raised back in 2020, we met with the Minister of Multicultural Affairs as well to make sure that our issues are addressed to them. They know what is currently impacting in the African community and what are the suggested solutions to resolve these issues. Of course, some of these might require an extra step, but some others would require just the mayor holding some meetings again to address some of those gaps and maybe provide some further finances if there is a need, and then address those issues. So this has been our work, and we've been just really doing just that, making sure that when there is an issue, we address it to the right stakeholders.
Absolutely. I think that's a very good strategy, because sometimes, when we have issues in our communities, we tend to talk about it, but then just talk and do nothing else. So it's important for people to come together and obviously consult the community, get different feelings and opinions from a variety of sources, and then document that and present it in a nice way. I mean, in a very presentable way to the authorities, so they know exactly what the community is recommending. To try to address the issue, and that sort of helps the decision makers to be aware of what is happening. And because the system here works with documentation. If you're just talking and there's nothing written that shows what needs to be done or what is being recommended, and then it becomes difficult for the government to respond. So that's something very good there. All right. We've got another probably 10 minutes to go with the show. I want to ask questions about youth engagement. In Victoria, for example, we've seen a lot of youth issues in this part of the country. I haven't heard much in terms of youth issues in Queensland. I know that doesn't mean there is no issue, but maybe not to the same extent that it is in Victoria, where there's a variety of issues with youth disengagement, and some of them ending in the prison system. What's the situation there in Queensland regarding African Australian youth?
I think I would say that the disengagement issue is no different from other states, but the only difference probably would be based on what are the approaches to ensure that those youth are engaged again in the community. There are a lot of strategies that are currently being put in place by the African community to ensure that those people who are disengaged being brought back into the community, they contribute to the needs of the community as needed. So there are a lot of programs and projects that are currently in place within the Queensland African Community Council as well. That is pretty much more to ensure that those youth who need support are supported. And I think that has been one of the main things that are also the current Queensland African Queensland Community Council has been also taking a lead on to make sure that it supports such youth who have been have been disengaged. We have different things that are being placed as well in being put in place, strategies such as, for example, we do have the engaging people, disengaged youth through sport, through games, through providing like a community hub where we can those youth can come and gather and meet together to address different issues experienced and probably suggest what they think would be a solution for them. Within the community, we've been having now a lot of either Zoom meetings to meet with those younger people, and also how there have been also sport organized that are pretty much funded at some point, or they just really organized by the community itself to make sure that those younger people who doesn't really have much to do yet, they really find something for a consolation. They might have a passion for sport, and they need somewhere where they can gather to play that sport. They may have a passion for education, and they need a hub where they can come and hear from someone who can motivate them and probably show them a path or pathway on how to get there again, where they've been disengaged from. So even school programs are being initiated as well by the Queensland community council, and just making sure that there is more outreach as well at schools from primary and high school students as well. Something that I pretty much sometimes tend to see myself going back to give back to the to maybe the high school that I've been attended before, probably at some point, or even university, and reach to those students as well to make sure that they are engaged. And I think that the beauty of having that togetherness, that organization, when we are organized, we are able to reach out to those who are in need of that nature. Because even the other body, African Professionals of Australia, have been doing the same work as well, reaching to university students as well, and ensure that they provide them some guidance and support. That has been pretty much one of the things we also identified in our forums, in the forum that I've been chairing as a COVID-19 community response of committee chairperson. It's been also really, we identified that as a problem, that there are youth who are disengaged. There are, let's say for instance, young people from African background, but they're international students here, and they don't really have any sort of support or anywhere else they can go. Reach out to them again, even in schools, and assuring that they're provided with the support needed.
All right. That's good. So there's a lot of engagement there from the community. I will take a few questions from the public. I think there's Cecilia Mpando says, drawing from a cold cultural perspective, to what extent and level of success has the African community peak body in Queensland been supportive or inclusive of women's and youth voices in leadership to add value to the body? What effective strategies, if any, have been employed so far? Understand what the question is?
Yeah, well, you mean in the sense of inclusion, to ensure that there is inclusion of women
and young people, yes.
Young people. Well, myself, I'm not really yet in any older, really pretty much fitting in the same younger category. It's always really commitment. The forum will be always there, and of course, we understand that the older generation sometimes don't trust young people, and there is still that issue of having women on board is still an issue for some. But really, from my perspective, I'm such a person who's really more an advocate for women rights. At some point, I do always advocate to have our women really being put in first places. And I'll give you a very good example. In the research committee that I've been chairing, I did prioritize that actually the vice or even to the secretarial position should be just females, and those are younger people as well. So I do have that mindset that I do believe that everyone is capable.
The Queensland African Community Council, how many women are there on the board, for example?
Well, we do have women in the body, and I think that's the research body as well, which is part of the African Community Council. So we do have females who are also even chairing or who are coordinator. For example, there's a female who's the current coordinator of the youth engagement. So there is a female who was also the coordinator of the media engagement. Sorry, there was a female also, so who is currently leading the health department. Sorry, we do have some little few departments within the body because we want to focus on different things, specific issues, and then we should have a person who is leading that work. And we've been having women, females who have been chairing in those positions. And of course, it's always really that availability uh, thing. If the person is available, then why not have that person in place? But
But
it's just a matter of
it's not
really
just availability; it's also an engagement, a sort of a commitment from the leadership,
commitment.
from the community, from the leadership to make sure that there are not just women but also young people. And of course, I understand sometimes defining what young person is it can be difficult. But I'm
Well,
assuming you have youth and women well represented in the Queensland Community Council, do you?
Well, yeah, we do have a lot of representative who are young people and in our community and women. And I just laughed when you said that it depends on how the definition of young people. Because I remember certain African country there was a meeting called by a president that we need to have younger people. We need to talk to younger people. And then folks who showed up there were in their 50s and their 60s. And I was just wondering, this person is a younger person as
We
well.
can
Well,
argue that they're still young, at least young, young in heart.
yes, and then you find that when you search and you find that actually the fella also have a younger person, a son or a daughter who is already 35 or something. Now you question how come this person is young? So I think it's always a definition of the person and how uh, that need is presented. But for us, I
Okay,
think here in Queensland, we believe in that any person who is identified as a younger person, really, it's obvious to tell that that's a younger person. We have new thinking way. We just believe in inclusion more than really that mindset that no, I belong to this tribe or something like that. And I think that the beauty of having younger people and women in place.
all right. As we're gonna wrap up the show now, just focus on a few tips and tools that you can give to the community, to anyone watching, in terms of what may be recommended to help improve community engagement, which is sort of a two-way street, really, is how the community engages with stakeholders, including the government or other bodies, multicultural bodies or professional bodies or whatever, and then how institutions engage with the community. What are some of the tools and tips that you may provide as a take home message to those watching?
If I can set tools and tips, really starting first with the community itself before I go with
Yeah,
the
yeah.
stakeholders, I would say the first thing is unity.
Hmm.
Unity is really important because there is nothing that can be achieved without having that group of people. But again, the most important advice is to, when that unity is there and then you start achieving something, it's not always the opportunity now to remember that you had a tribe you belong to. So if you start together, please go together and achieve something greater than where you are. Don't be
Yeah,
just satisfied that we've reached at this level, and then that's where you are becoming now a tribalist, and now you are becoming now a person who remembers that actually I do have a family. It's an opportunity for me to now bring all my brothers and my sisters and all those close to me to share the benefit that everyone have been working for,
okay, so
because the money.
sorry, just for the sake of time, unity is one. Let's go to the next. We only have
So
about 2 3
unity
minutes
is the
left.
first thing.
Yeah,
Sorry, and then have plans in place,
yeah,
vision on what you really want to achieve.
yeah.
Sorry,
Vision
and
and
then
plan.
value those people who you're really working with to make sure
Hmm.
that they feel valued and the contribution they're making to that particular body is also recognized. So
Hmm.
don't really put yourself as the only person who matter,
Yeah,
so that selfish ambition shouldn't be that ego.
yeah.
Always remember that whatever achievement you're achieving, you are not a single person, but you are achieving it as a collection, in a collective way. So
Hmm.
therefore, always remember those people. But when I go again to the same thing, always remember that there are people who are also don't understand you, who don't understand that community. They don't know anything about that community. You are there to educate the society of
Hmm.
who you are. Because otherwise, if you can do that, someone else will do it on your behalf. And we've seen that a lot in our communities, that people are speaking on behalf of African community when themselves don't understand what the African community.
All right.
That's
From the
very
government.
important. From the government perspective, I would really advise, first of things, engage the grassroots. Make sure that the government's listening to the grassroots, to the community. So they should be there first to go. We understand there are a lot of organizations as well that are there, of course, but there should be work to be done between government, NGOs, as well as the community. Don't leave the community in the equation. And the second, do not generalize the community. Do not just say that we understand that one African person committed crime, therefore all Africans are criminals, or therefore all the Africans have this issue. If one African is impacted with COVID-19 or didn't follow rules, it doesn't mean that all Africans doesn't follow rules. Don't generalize, but engage that community, speak to that community, and make sure that you listen on what are their needs and their challenges. Another thing, make sure that governments are really are really engaging with community leaders and faith leaders, those who are currently who understands the needs of that community. And one important thing that I would also point out is to support those community-led strategies. If the community is putting some strategies forward, support that. Government must really support that. Don't really always find excuses to why you shouldn't support the community, but always prioritize to hear from the community and support it. And then make sure that there are resources available for those communities that can be easy to disseminate, like the way the current Queensland government is also doing. We've been pretty much advising on the same area, and there is a lot of dissemination happening. And then ensure that you set up meetings with those communities, can be forums, hear from them, ask questions, let them tell you what they want to be done, not
Okay.
you suggesting what you think and what you feel should be done.
All right. The government should let the community tell it what to do to address the issue of the community rather than it telling the communities what to do. That's one very, very good way to end this show. Ben Shuli, thank you very much for your time to African Knowledge. We appreciate you coming to the show and talking about your own experience, the experience of the African Australian community in Queensland, and the things that have happened there that are actually quite very good. That body is one that has been quite successful and should set a good example for many other African groups around the country. We hope that even though this is the first time, but it's not the last, that we will see you again in future editions of this show to share more about your insights, knowledge, and experience in Queensland. We thank you and want to pass our greetings to all the people at the Queensland Community Council. And I'm actually trying to get the current president to come and talk to us about what he's doing in the organization. That's something that we will be planning sometime in the next few weeks. Thank you again,
Fantastic.
Ben.
Thanks for having me as well.
No worries. And for those watching, thank you for your time to Africa Media Australia. We encourage you, as always, to share the video, to subscribe to our channel, so you can our YouTube channel, so you can be notified. Subscribe and make sure you tick that clock so that you are notified when we have new publications. And if you have something of value to share with the community, we encourage you to contact us, and we'll be more than happy to have you come to the show and share what you know. Until next time, stay blessed and stay safe. Thank you.
Thanks.